name. And then I was like, hey guys, and I was like, all right, just want you to know, I was like, if my energy seems a little low, I just came from the dentist. I'm still numb. I can't even feel my tongue on this side. So it's not
Oh
y'all, I promise.
no.
Y'all make me happy that I'm seeing you. So I feel like that also helps, like with
Yes.
humanizing creators, just
Right,
letting people know what's actually
exactly.
going on. Yeah, so nobody ever thinks like, hey, what did I do to you? And it's like, no, no,
Right.
no.
Yeah, that's so real. Like people appreciate that because with you having a moment where, well, two moments where one was a good encounter, one was not, and you kind of taking that like, okay, here's how I want to be. If I ever get to a place, like that, and people really respect that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and I learned that you can't um control anybody but yourself. You know what I'm saying? So that's one thing that I kind of live by, that's taking a lot of burden off my shoulders. I
Mhm.
can only give people my truth. So by telling you, "Hey, I went to the dentist and this is what's going on," I've given you my truth, and what you do with that at that point is no longer in my control. So I can't, if there's any like thing wrong with the interaction post the truth, then I've done all I can essentially
Yeah,
to go to sleep at night and be okay. So,
right. And that's on them if they happen to get, offended
mhm.
or whatever. Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally. So, what does like a typical day look like for you with you wearing
Ooh.
multiple hats? What does like a day look like for you?
Oh my goodness. So that's one of my favorite things about social media. No day looks exactly the same, like at all. And it's funny because I am actually neurodivergent. I have ADHD, and I've been diagnosed for many, many years at this point, but I crave like stimulants, or like stimulus around in my life. So I like the new, the fresh. I like being able to start a new project like every day, other or like every week, and things like that. And that's also why I love my upcoming podcast, because I'm able to jump from topic to topic every single episode. And even within the episodes, when people listen, they'll see we're kind of going off on our own tangents as well within the topic. So yeah, I think that, so getting back to the question, every day, I know there's some things that are consistent. I'm Jamaican, for people who didn't know. So I love tea. Like tea and I are one. We are here. So I always start every day. I don't think there's been a day, probably within the last like couple years. I don't know. I always start my mornings with tea. I don't think I've gone a day without drinking
What
tea.
kind? What kind of tea do you like the best?
Oh, I got a collection. Okay. So
Oh, yes.
I feel like that's such a Caribbean thing too. Where it's like, I remember we had family friends come over and they were like, we didn't know what y'all's tea selection was like," and they broke out a trunk and had like their whole little
That's
travel tea
awesome.
mahogany case. But I think my favorites would be peppermint. Love me some peppermint and herbal teas, especially. I love ginger tea, like ginger, turmeric. I recently got a really bougie tea. My best
Oh.
friend came by a couple like weeks ago, and we we drank, it's like a white tea with like infused with like rose, so it tastes like,
Oh, fancy.
it tastes like literal rose flowers, and it's just so bougie, and we were sitting on the porch just like, ooh girl, this is the life. So
Oh,
but I
and it's
started
good
to
for
taste
you.
my
It's
buds.
good for you, so that's okay.
Oh yeah, my grandpa would be proud if he watched this. He'd be like, because he's one of those, Brianna, did you drink your tea today?" And I'm like, I'm like,
Aww.
yes, grandpa, I drank tea today. He's like, okay, making sure.
That's so cute. So
Yeah.
speaking of like your upbringing then, how has that impacted like who you are today? Whether it be, like from your culture or from your previous like your college experience, school experiences, having that diagnosis of ADHD, like how has that kind of just like laid the foundation for you who you are today?
Oh man, oh, I love this question. So, one of the things that I appreciate so much about my lived experiences is that I've experienced quite a bit of duality in my life, right? So, I feel as though, for the early portion of my life, I grew up predominantly, in New York, around my mom, my grandparents, and though we were in America, my mom was born in Jamaica, raised there for the beginning, portion of her life and everything. So I feel like I did have very much a Jamaican upbringing in the sense of like food, culture, standards, accents, everything,
Yeah.
even to this day, when I get really relaxed, like late in the evening, my friends will kind of point out the way I pronounce certain words, even though I wasn't born in Jamaica. That's, who I learned English from is my
Right.
grandparents. So certain words still have a little bit of an accent, and that's something I appreciate. But I feel like there are certain values that I learned early on. Especially, I know this is a Jamaican stereotype, but about work ethic.
Okay.
um, I remember in college when I had 5 jobs, my mom was like, "Oh, girl, you're a true Jamaican now." Like you,
Wow.
but even
Wow.
just the duality of growing up in a household of, being first generation, and then, moving to the Maryland area, and then being predominantly around, my friends who were Black American and generationally raised in America, and having to adjust, then also growing up a portion of my life without that diagnosis, and then being diagnosed later, and my mom having to just do so many apologies, like, "Oh, girl, I just," because I used to get in so
Oh,
much trouble, but like not in the like intentional way. I used to,
right, right.
in school, like blurting things out all the time. And speaking to that, even we spoke about activism to a degree. I've always, since I was a very little kid, I could imagine like as early as about 7 years old, had a very, very, very soft spot for people that had any type of disability, or they were living with circumstances beyond their control in
Yeah.
any way,
Yeah.
and especially around like autism, cerebral palsy, all these different disabilities. I could never quite explain it at that time, but I
Hmm.
realize now that I'm older that I felt a deep empathy, because I was living with a disability that I didn't know about at the
Right.
time.
Hmm.
And so I feel like that shaped my views quite a bit. I was volunteering in different school systems and things like that since I was literally a kid. We had like the special education wing in my elementary school, and I was literally a volunteer and would leave class to go to the field day and everything like that, and just brought me so much joy to be able to just be a part of the lives of people who um, didn't I wouldn't even say needed my help, because most of the people I met are just so phenomenal, but just them allowing me into their space and their life meant so much. So I feel like, yeah, just the duality, and then growing up part of my life with a single parent, and then my mom, getting married, and then growing up with a two-parent household for the last like third of everything. It was just like
Okay.
I feel like I can empathize with a lot of different people and situations because I've experienced so many like opposites in my life as well.
Right. Yeah. I can definitely tell. I can tell by just, this conversation just so far, I can tell just like that has really helped you just and how your platform is too. Like you stand up for like you are an activist, you talk about things
Mhm.
like Black feminism and things like that and different disabilities. And I think
Yes.
that that's really important. I think that really like that makes you like an influencer, like an actual influencer,
Oh,
just
thank
influencing
you.
people. Yeah, influencing
Oh my
people
goodness.
like to hear and talk about these things. And that's why we do want to talk about your podcast too, because you do address a lot of really important issues. So can you talk about that? Like what can people expect from your
Oh my
podcast?
goodness, yes. So my podcast, basically, I love, love, love learning about people. And one of my goals early on in like middle school was to never have hatred in my heart. Like because I've really had a deep knowing that a lot of the times things people hate are simply because they don't understand. And I feel like most things, once I
Mm,
understand them, it's very hard to hate them. I don't have to agree, but
right.
I can understand, right? So I during this pandemic was having so many more like than usual conversations in depth with like my mom about how we even realized that we had put our femininity or our womanhood aside because being Black was so much more of its own battle day to day. So like,
Mhm.
and when I say so much more, I mean in the presence of like what the community was focused on, right? So there were so many
Right.
things I remember neglecting like about my womanhood. So even just this year realizing, oh, that's why when that man reached over me and shook the guy behind me's head, like I was irritated because like sometimes as a black woman you're like, was that sexism, was it racism, was it ableism,
Right.
like you just don't know which ism it was, or was it all of them? Like
So many.
yeah. So I was having these conversations, and even with my friends from college and things like that. And I was like, dang, like after the call, I'd be like, I wish, or even sometimes during, I'd be like, I wish somebody was like a fly on the wall, especially people from groups that don't identify with what we're talking about, but even more
Mm.
so groups that do. Like, I wish people could just be a fly on the wall and hear these conversations. And then I was like, one day it was just like light bulb. I was like, wait, they can. I can actually make this a thing that somebody can really listen and engage with. So people can expect one, topics that are really close and personal to me. We have an episode on the podcast about invisible disabilities, and how that can impact someone's life, even in the community, and things about natural hair, race, being first generation, right? But then and sexuality, of course, being also part of the LGBTQIA plus community. I was really excited to have an episode about biphobia and things like that. So you can also expect things that I want to learn more about, and
Mm-hmm.
areas where I feel like just naturally curious. I feel like the podcast is a great episode, like not episode, a great opportunity for me to learn more about things. So imagine, there's something you've always wanted to know more about. You're like, dang, I really want to learn about this neighborhood that's been around since the 1600s or something, right? I can literally find someone who's a descendant of a family that was from that neighborhood and has archives, and sit and talk with them for an hour. So I feel like that's something I'm most excited about, is to actually learn and expand my palette about different cultures, different social classes, different people that live on the margins of society. So that's what people can expect. It gets intense at times, it's funny at times, it's a roller coaster per episode. Every episode's different. So I think
Yeah.
people can also expect the unexpected. We even have an episode on like witch talk, the occult, and astrology, things like
Oh,
that.
wow.
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yes. And we have like a couple spirituality episodes as well. So I'm excited. Very excited.
Yeah. I'm excited for it to launch. When is it launching?
So the podcast episode one will be launching January 18th. And I'm
Cool.
so
That's
excited,
coming
right
up.
around the corner.
Yay.
Yes. And it's a good way to, I feel like, to start the new year. And I know a
Yeah.
lot of people are looking for um, just like their path for the year, and kind of setting their intentions and things. So I feel like what better way to start than with learning good conversation